The village of Thornfield sat nestled in the rolling hills of southeastern Ohio, a place where the morning mist lingered until noon and the forest seemed to whisper ancient secrets. In 1837, this settlement of barely 800 souls became the unwitting stage for events so disturbing that county records would later be found, with entire pages carefully removed. The Thornfield Convent of Merciful Sisters accepted 47 young women between 1835 and 1838. Only 19 would ever be seen by their families again. Sealed correspondence between the Bishop of Cincinnati and Vatican authorities, uncovered during a courthouse renovation in 1923, mentioned regrettable incidents of spiritual corruption requiring discretion. 3 separate investigations were launched. All were abruptly terminated without explanation. The convent itself was abandoned by 1839, its stone walls left to crumble beneath creeping ivy and collective silence. Are you brave enough to learn what happened within those walls? What could make an entire diocese pretend a convent never existed? Why would church records of 28 women simply vanish, as if they had never taken their vows or drawn breath? The answer lies not in demonic possession or religious hysteria, as local legends suggest. The truth is far more rational, and infinitely more terrifying. For within those sacred walls, faith became a perfect mask for something else entirely: progress without conscience. The Convent of Merciful Sisters stood 3 miles from Thornfield proper, perched atop a hill overlooking the village like a watchful guardian. Its grey stone walls and single bell tower were visible from every home, a constant reminder of God's presence. The building had once been a trading post, then a military garrison during earlier conflicts with native tribes. By the time Mother Superior Agatha Blackwood arrived with 4 senior sisters in the spring of 1835, the property had stood vacant for nearly a decade. "Providence has blessed us with isolation," Mother Agatha wrote to her benefactor, "for here our special work may continue undisturbed." That benefactor, whose name appears in no official record, but whose distinctive handwriting marks dozens of letters, provided funds far beyond what a simple convent would require. The man signed only as Dr. S. and wrote frequently from Philadelphia, where he held a prestigious medical position at the university. Thornfield in the 1830s was changing rapidly. The recently completed canal had brought commerce and new settlers, but also tension between the established families and newcomers. The town's physician, Dr. Malcolm Thorne, descendant of the town's founders, watched the convent's establishment with initial approval. A devout man with European education, he appreciated having proper women of faith to tend to female ailments, sparing him the impropriety of treating certain conditions. "The sisters provide invaluable service," he noted in his journals, "particularly for young women of delicate constitution and nervous temperament. Those afflicted with female hysteria or unnatural tendencies find structure and purpose through prayer and discipline." What Dr. Thorne didn't mention was that he himself had studied with Dr. S. years earlier, or that their correspondence predated the convent's establishment by nearly 3 years. Thomas Cooper, a local hunter who supplied the convent with game, was the first to notice something wasn't right. In late autumn of 1836, returning from his traps before dawn, he spotted unusual activity through the convent's chapel windows. Instead of prayer candles, bright lamps illuminated the space. Instead of kneeling sisters, he glimpsed white-aproned figures moving with purpose around what appeared to be a table. "Weren't praying, that's certain," Cooper later told his wife. "Looked more like butchers at work, they did. All hunched over something on that altar that surely wasn't the good book." When Cooper mentioned his observations to Father Bennett at Sunday service, the priest dismissed his concerns immediately. "The sisters keep different hours for their devotions," he explained stiffly. "Their ways are not for us to question." That might have been the end of it, had Cooper not noticed the smell the following week. Approaching the convent with a freshly killed deer slung across his shoulders, a sickly sweet odor stopped him at the kitchen door. It reminded him of the time he'd found an abandoned medical campsite during the cholera outbreak. Carbolic acid and something else he couldn't name, but that made his stomach turn. Something ain't natural, he insisted to anyone who would listen. But the townsfolk had grown dependent on the sisters' herbal remedies and their school for girls. His concerns earned him only scorn and whispers that perhaps he'd been drinking before his morning hunts. The image that haunted Cooper most, that he described to his wife in whispers after waking from nightmares, was of a pale hand visible through the chapel's window, not clasped in prayer, but hanging limply over the edge of whatever lay on that table. A thin, dark line running from wrist to elbow that glistened in the lamplight. By spring of 1837, people began to notice changes in the young women who had joined the convent or been sent there for education. Mary Sullivan, once known for her quick wit and musical laughter, returned to her family after 6 months, appearing thin and subdued. Her mother noted with concern that Mary would sit for hours, staring at nothing, responding to questions with delayed, careful precision, as if each word required calculation. "She moves like someone half asleep," Mrs. Sullivan confided to her sister. And when I asked about her time with the sisters, she said only that she had learned to be useful. Catherine Webb, daughter of the town's blacksmith, returned from 3 months at the convent school with similar vacancy in her once spirited eyes. Most disturbing were the small, perfectly circular scars along her hairline, which she refused to explain. When her father demanded answers, she replied with unsettling serenity, "The treatments helped me find peace. Mother Agatha says some memories are best removed so new purpose can take root." What truly alarmed the Webbs was Catherine's complete lack of recognition when her childhood dog bounded up to greet her. She stared at the animal as if she'd never seen a dog before, then asked in a clinical tone if the creature was useful to the household. The pattern repeated with other girls. They returned docile, obedient, and strangely detached from their former lives. Some parents, particularly those who had sent rebellious or difficult daughters to the convent, initially praised the transformation. "The sisters have accomplished what we could not," one father remarked. "My daughter no longer speaks out of turn or questions her duties." But as weeks passed, even these parents grew uneasy. The girls showed no joy, no anger, no passion of any kind. They performed tasks with mechanical efficiency, but initiated nothing. Most disturbing were the vacant pauses, moments when they seemed to simply stop existing, staring into nothing until spoken to directly. And always, when questioned about their time at the convent, the same phrase emerged: "I learned to be useful." Among the young women sent to the Convent of Merciful Sisters in the summer of 1837 was Eleanor Harwood, the only daughter of a widowed shopkeeper. Unlike many girls who entered those walls, Eleanor went neither for religious calling nor correction of temperament. Her father had simply fallen ill, and with no relatives willing to take in a 19-year-old girl of advanced education and stubborn disposition, the convent seemed the only respectable option. Eleanor arrived with 2 books hidden in her modest trunk: a journal bound in leather, gifted by her late mother, and a slim volume on human anatomy she'd purchased from a traveling bookseller. The daughter of a man who believed in educating women, Eleanor had developed both a questioning mind and the wisdom to conceal it when necessary. "I shall observe everything," she wrote in her first hidden journal entry. "Father always said that knowledge is protection, and I sense protection is what I shall need most in this place." From her first day, Eleanor noted oddities others might have dismissed. The convent housed surprisingly few actual nuns, only 7 fully habited sisters including Mother Agatha. Yet there were rooms she was forbidden to enter, doors that remained locked, and an entire wing of the building that hummed with activity at night while remaining silent during daylight hours. Most telling was the separation of the young women. Those who had come willingly as postulants lived and worked together. while girls sent for correction were housed separately and seen only at specific times of day, always appearing increasingly subdued as weeks passed. They segregate us based on some criteria I haven't yet determined, Eleanor wrote by candlelight. But I've counted 32 young women in total, though we never gather all together. Those who return from the East Wing seem diminished somehow. Their eyes track movement, but the person behind them seems to have receded somewhere unreachable. Mother Agatha took particular interest in Eleanor after discovering her reading a borrowed prayer book rather than merely holding it. "You have an educated mind," the older woman observed, her tone revealing neither approval nor condemnation. "Perhaps you might assist with our records. We have need of someone with a precise hand and attention to detail." Thus Eleanor gained access to the convent's office, where she was tasked with transcribing letters and maintaining inventory of supplies. What caught her attention immediately was the volume of medical materials listed, quantities of ether and chloroform that seemed excessive for a small infirmary, surgical tools more suited to a hospital than a convent, and curious entries for cranial measurement devices and electrical nerve stimulators. More disturbing were the coded entries in a separate ledger, where young women's names appeared alongside notations like Phase 1 complete or subject responsive to memory suppression technique. Eleanor began creating her own cipher, documenting everything in tiny script on pages she sewed into the lining of her dress. She sketched the convent's layout, noting which rooms were kept locked and which sisters had keys. She recorded conversations, particularly those between Mother Agatha and Dr. Thorne during his weekly visits. The good doctor speaks of remarkable progress and advancing the frontiers of the mind, she wrote. Today he mentioned selective memory extraction and identity reconstruction while examining Catherine's healing incisions. They speak as if the girls are merely vessels to be emptied and refilled with more desirable contents. The methods of control became increasingly clear to Eleanor's observant eyes. The girls were kept on strict schedules that prevented private conversation. Their food often carried a bitter undertaste that Eleanor avoided by trading portions or claiming stomach upset. Those who showed independence were isolated for special prayer retreats, returning days later with that same vacant compliance shown by the others. "They're not breaking their spirits," Eleanor realized with horror. "They're removing them entirely." On the night Eleanor discovered the treatment room, she had been searching for Jessica, a spirited girl who had been taken for spiritual counseling after speaking sharply to one of the sisters. Following the sound of muffled machinery, Eleanor found herself in the converted chapel, where the altar had been replaced by a table fitted with leather restraints. The room contained equipment she recognized from medical illustrations, a device for administering electrical current, trays of surgical instruments, and glass containers of liquid specimens. Most chilling was the leather-bound book open on a side table, containing detailed sketches of the human brain with areas marked for excision and stimulation. What Eleanor witnessed that night: Jessica strapped to the table, Dr. Thorne carefully positioning metal probes at her temples while Mother Agatha monitored her pulse, made one thing terrifyingly clear. These were not spiritual treatments. They were systematically altering the minds of young women, section by section, function by function. "God forgive me for my cowardice," Eleanor wrote, hands trembling so badly the ink blotted. "I hid rather than intervene. But I know now that I'm witness to monstrous science, and I shall be next if they discover what I've seen." 2 days later, Mother Agatha summoned Eleanor to her office, where Dr. Thorne waited with that same clinical smile he wore in the treatment room. "Eleanor, my dear," Mother Agatha began, "Dr. Thorne has observed your exceptional faculties of mind and organization. We believe you could benefit greatly from our special guidance program. You show remarkable neural development for a woman," Dr. Thorne added, examining her as one might a horse at auction. Your capabilities, properly channeled, could make you extraordinarily useful to our work." Eleanor feigned honored gratitude while her mind raced with escape plans. That night, she hid her journal pages inside her mattress and prepared for what she knew would be her only chance. She had noted the delivery schedule. Tomorrow, before dawn, the baker's boy would leave bread at the kitchen door. The kitchen sister was habitually late, a 10-minute window of opportunity if she timed it perfectly. "They've scheduled my first treatment for tomorrow afternoon," she wrote in her final entry that night. Dr. Thorne spoke of selective reduction of my excessive independence centers while retaining my organizational capabilities. "They intend to hollow me out and leave only what serves them. By the time anyone reads these words, I will either be free or no longer myself." A violent summer storm provided unexpected cover for Eleanor's escape. With rain lashing against the windows and thunder shaking the ancient walls, she slipped from her bed at 4 in the morning. Using a hairpin to unlock her door, a skill learned from her father's shop, she made her way through darkened corridors toward the kitchen. What Eleanor hadn't anticipated was encountering Sister Agnes, returning from the treatment room with an empty syringe. Their eyes met in the flash of lightning that illuminated the hallway. For one terrible moment, Eleanor was certain her plan had failed before it began. Then something unexpected happened. Sister Agnes, young, thin, with eyes that had always seemed vaguely troubled, glanced at the small bundle clutched to Eleanor's chest, then deliberately stepped aside. "Go with God," the sister whispered, so softly Eleanor nearly missed it beneath the rumble of thunder. "And should you reach safety, remember us." The baker's boy, drenched and hurrying to finish his deliveries, barely noticed the hooded figure who slipped past him into the storm. By the time the convent bell rang for morning prayer, Eleanor Harwood had vanished into the wilderness, her documentation of horror sewn into her clothing and pressed against her racing heart. Sheriff William Mercer had heard strange rumors about the convent for months, but as a practical man with a growing town to manage, he had dismissed them as superstitious nonsense. That changed on the morning a half-drowned young woman staggered into his office, clothes torn from forest brambles, eyes wild with exhaustion and fear. "You must help them," were Eleanor's first coherent words after he'd provided her with a blanket and hot coffee. "They're not healing troubled minds, they're destroying them." Initially skeptical, the sheriff's doubts wavered as Eleanor produced her carefully preserved documentation. Pages of observations written in precise handwriting, sketches of medical equipment, a map of the convent showing locked rooms and the repurposed chapel. Most damning were the copied entries from Dr. Thorne's own records, detailing procedures and outcomes for girls the town believed were simply receiving religious instruction. "They speak of it as science," Eleanor explained, voice steadying as she found a willing listener. "Dr. Thorne believes he's perfecting techniques to remove undesirable traits from the female mind. Independence, questioning, creative thinking, while preserving abilities for service and obedience." Sheriff Mercer might have dismissed her still, had his own niece not returned from the convent 3 months earlier, a shadow of her former self. The vacant eyes and mechanical responses that his sister had attributed to spiritual transformation suddenly took on a more sinister cast. "If what you're saying is true," he said slowly, "this goes beyond my authority. We'll need the county prosecutor and possibly state officials. By then, it will be too late for Jessica and the others currently under their treatment," Eleanor insisted. "Every day, more of who they are disappears beneath the knife and electrical current." It took 2 days to organize a proper investigation. 2 days during which Eleanor barely slept, jumping at shadows and repeatedly checking that her documentation remained secure. When Sheriff Mercer finally assembled a group including the county prosecutor, a medical examiner from Columbus, and 4 deputies, a strange stillness had settled over the convent hill. No smoke rose from the kitchen chimney, no bell rang for prayers. When they reached the heavy wooden doors, their knocks echoed unanswered through clearly empty halls. "Break it down," the prosecutor ordered, and the resulting crash seemed to emphasize the unnatural silence within. What they found defied immediate comprehension. The dormitories stood empty, beds stripped clean. The kitchen remained orderly but cold, as if abandoned mid-preparation. Most disturbing was the converted chapel, where the treatment table remained with its restraints, surrounded by equipment that the medical examiner examined with growing horror. "This is advanced surgical apparatus," he confirmed, lifting a device with delicate probes. "Used for procedures that are purely theoretical in most medical circles. Cerebral modification, electrical stimulation of brain tissue. These techniques were proposed in Vienna last year but considered too dangerous and ethically questionable for human application." In a locked cabinet, they discovered leather-bound journals dating back 3 years, detailing experiments conducted first at a facility in Philadelphia, then transferred to Ohio, where privacy and freedom from interference could be assured. The entries, in Dr. Thorne's meticulous hand, documented progressive refinement of techniques to excise undesirable neural pathways and reconstruct compliant personality structures. The final pages contained hurried notes about relocating the subjects and securing continued research funding from interested parties in Europe. The last entry, dated the morning after Eleanor's escape, mentioned only "compromise unavoidable, implementing contingency protocol." Most chilling were the specimen jars found in a hidden cellar room containing preserved sections of human brain tissue, each labeled with initials and dates. The medical examiner could barely maintain his professional composure as he identified certain samples as taken from still living subjects. These people weren't doctors or nuns, Sheriff Mercer concluded grimly. They were monsters with medical training. A search of Dr. Thorne's abandoned home in town revealed correspondence with medical institutions in Germany and France, discussing revolutionary advances in behavioral modification and the successful separation of emotional centers from functional capabilities. One letter mentioned substantial payment for proven techniques of neural compliance induction in female subjects. The whereabouts of Dr. Thorne, Mother Agatha, and the other sisters remained unknown. More disturbingly, 23 young women had vanished with them. Investigators found records of a late-night departure by private canal boats, but the trail went cold at the Ohio River. Rumors would later surface of similar experimental treatments appearing in private asylums throughout Europe, but no direct connection could ever be proven. For the affected families of Thornfield, the horror continued long after the investigation concluded. Those girls who had returned before the convent's abandonment remained forever altered, functional but emotionless, capable of following instructions but unable to form new memories or connections. Medical experts brought from as far as Boston confirmed what Eleanor had witnessed. Portions of their minds had been systematically damaged or removed. It is as if they extracted everything that made them individuals, one physician noted, leaving only the machinery of existence. Eleanor Harwood never returned to Thornfield. After providing testimony to authorities, she retreated to a small community in Pennsylvania where she lived quietly as a bookkeeper. The documentation she had risked her life to preserve became part of a sealed government file, deemed too disturbing for public knowledge, and eventually relegated to archive obscurity. On rare occasions, she would write to Sheriff Mercer, who had become something of a protective figure during the investigation. In her final letter, sent nearly 30 years after her escape, she reflected on the lasting impact of what she had witnessed. "I still see their faces in my dreams," she wrote. "Not as they were at the end, empty vessels moving without purpose, but as they were before, young women with hopes and minds and futures. I wonder sometimes if I did enough, if I should have acted sooner, spoken louder." The most terrifying aspect was not the procedures themselves, though they haunt me still. It was the cold rationality behind them. The belief that a woman's mind could be reduced to useful components while discarding all that made her human. The Convent of Merciful Sisters never appears in official church records. When questioned decades later, diocesan authorities claimed no knowledge of its existence, despite tax records and land deeds proving otherwise. Local histories mention only that a religious establishment briefly occupied the old trading post site before burning down in 1839, a fire conveniently destroying any remaining physical evidence. The stone foundations still stand on that hillside, overgrown with brambles and deliberately forgotten. Local children are warned away with vague tales of ghosts and bad air. Few realize they are playing near what might have been America's first systematic attempt at surgical mind control, a place where science divorced from humanity created a horror more profound than any supernatural haunting. For what truly happened at Thornfield Convent reveals a fundamental truth more chilling than any ghost story. When knowledge advances without conscience, when human beings become mere subjects for experimentation, the greatest monsters are not those of legend or nightmare. They are men and women of education and intelligence who decide that progress justifies any cost, even if that cost is paid in minds and souls that were never theirs to take.